Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of No One's a Critic. I'm Kino, and I'm joined, as always, by Mac. How you doing this week, Mac?
I'm doing fantastic. Very exciting. I know I mentioned it on the last episode, my leftovers video that is dropping tomorrow in
Oh,
accordance
nice.
with the 11th anniversary of the sudden departure. So
Oh,
very
nice.
excited for that. So we'll see how
Yeah.
that goes. Glad to have it done.
Congratulations on getting that project. I know it's been a long time coming, and I'm really excited to see it. Like I said, even though I haven't seen the show, I'm interested in just checking out what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, we talked about that before. I do that all the time. I'll watch I think I watched JX's he had they had like a 5 hour video on Doctor Who or something.
Ah,
And
yeah.
I was like, and I've never seen Doctor Who. I have no interest in watching it.
I watched one episode. It's people said that one of the best episodes of the show ever is called I think it's called Blink, but it's
Oh, I've heard that. I've heard
yeah,
of that
yeah.
one. Yeah.
People say it's the best episode of the show, and I watched it. That was really good. But then I was like, well, if I just watch the best episode right now, then it's all downhill from here.
All
So
downhill from here.
why
Yeah.
would I watch more of it? But I know that community of they have a word for it. It's called like a super Who lock, which is like the show Supernatural, Doctor Who, and Sherlock are like apparently like people are fans of all three shows. It's like a huge community, a big thing. And
Yeah, that
I
makes
kind of think
sense.
of it the same way as like you got The Sopranos, you got The Wire, you got Mad Men, you got Boardwalk Empire of the
Breaking
good
Bad.
shows. Yeah,
Yeah,
Breaking Bad in there, Better Call Saul. So we all have our different communities of shared interests.
I feel that. They're not super similar, but they're like connected in spirit somehow, like via style and theme, like somehow. But how what have you been up to this past week or so?
I have been. Well, I recorded the episodes a while ago, but I'm finally wrapping up Breaking Bad with Breaking Bad Tober. That's going really well. People are excited to get videos every single day of the week, um, and I'm really excited to be done with Breaking Bad logs, just because I've been doing them basically for a whole year now. So it feels good to finally close that chapter of my life and be like I can move on to some other stuff. So
It feels good to
all in all,
finish
really
like a
good. Yeah.
series like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you. I'm not done with. I mean, I'll make more videos on Breaking Bad eventually, but the whole Breaking Bad log thing will finally be done, and I can move on to some more creative projects.
Hell yeah. Yeah, it's always good to finish like a long project.
Hmm.
But today we are going to be embarking on a new project of both of our
Yep.
developing, I guess you should say. The first episode of our film club or movie club, if you'd put it. It's like a book club, but instead of reading a book because that's for fucking losers, we watch movies and then we talk about them. We'll let you know. So we'll let like our audiences know like a couple days or maybe like a week beforehand of when
Hmm.
the episode drops, so
Yep.
you guys can, if you haven't seen the movie in a while, you can give it another watch, um, just to kind of give it a second watch. So for the first episode, I actually asked if we could do this movie because I feel in today's day and age, it is more relevant. It is so relevant. It's like I actually just rewatched it literally 15 minutes ago. I just finished it
Nice.
because I've been editing all day. Um, it is it is insane how relevant it is even today, especially in the current state of with young men and masculinity and whatnot. And that film is Fight Club, a film I'm sure most of you have seen, but may not have revisited in a while.
Yeah, definitely. I was excited to do this one too because it's a movie I hadn't seen in a long time either. I liked it when I watched it again, but you never know what your thoughts are going to be on it when you rewatch it and you're like, oh, I forgot about that part, or I didn't realize they were doing this kind of thing. So I'm excited to talk with you about that. Before we just jump in, I'll go ahead and maybe just give a quick summary of the movie. For those of you, for some reason, a lot of people watch these kind of videos even though they haven't seen the thing we're talking about. So I always like to give a summary, even if it's redundant to a lot of you. So the movie is about our narrator, our main character, played by Edward Norton, is a white collar worker, a yuppie living a very consumerist lifestyle. He has a job he kind of hates, but he likes making money so he can buy, stuff for his apartment, have a bunch of nice things around. And he's also suffering from insomnia, uh, implied to be kind of brought on by depression. His world is just kind of bleak, and there's nothing really good about it aside from the material things in his life. Um, he he starts attending these support groups for various like diseases like testicular cancer is like the main one he's a part of, but other diseases as well. And he finds that just being part of this world kind of gets him out of his slump. He's with people who are actually dealing with pain, and that kind of snaps him out of his depression a little bit and gets him sleeping again. Um, that's eventually kind of ruined when he sees a woman named Marla at a number of these meetings as well, and she's obviously faking it as well because she's attending multiple group meetings just like he is, and he doesn't like her because she reminds him that he's a fake. So eventually he goes on a business trip and runs into a guy named Tyler Durden, played by Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt's like this really cool. Tyler Durden is this really cool guy. He's very suave. He sells soap, and he's just an interesting person. That's like much different than the normal kind of losers, including our narrator that he usually meets. I feel like I've been talking for a while. Do you want to maybe jump in at this point and we can maybe tag team back and forth the description of the movie?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. So it's basically about like Pina said, narrator, kind of loser. He's just kind of consumerist lifestyle, depressed, doesn't really know what direction his life has. Something that I think a lot of young men feel very much, especially nowadays. Then he meets a gentleman named Tyler Durden, who's sort of like this like anarchist kind of like do whatever you want sort of cool masculine dude, and they start a fight club together, which eventually involves into Project Mayhem, which is sort of a quasi terrorist organization where they cause mayhem through the city, and it's all about the entire idea is about sort of like rebelling against society and whatnot. Um, and then in the end, it turns out the big sort of twist of the film, the classic twist, of course, probably one of the greatest of all time, is that Tyler Durden is in fact a split personality of the narrator, and has been the entire film. So rewatching the film, that's it. It was so cool to rewatch the film again because that had been a while, and it's amazing just rewatching it and seeing how you rewatch the film and you're like, oh, it's so fucking obvious. Like the film wasn't even trying to hide it. It was like in plain sight. But back in 1999, when the film came out, or at least from my understanding, twist endings of that sort weren't like super, like that twist of like the alternate personality, like that's used like in so many fucking psychological thrillers today. But back then, it just kind of was something that was brand new.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a lot of cool details that show that the narrator is Tyler Durden. Even some non like there's some plot stuff where it's like Marla like he's all weirded out after he talks to her after sex because he's acting like they didn't have sex, and she's like, "What the fuck's wrong with you?"
Man, it's so obvious. You're like the conversation. You're like, oh my god, it's like, how did you miss this the first time
Well, there's
through?
also a great detail I saw in the beginning when he calls Tyler Durden because his apartment blows up. He's got nowhere to stay. He's the one who blew it up because Tyler Durden's the one who blew it up himself. But he calls Tyler Durden from the business card, and he's like, Tyler answers, Brad Pitt answers, and he's like, "Who is this?" And the narrator Edward Norton says, "Tyler?" question mark. But it's like he's like he Edward Norton's asking if he reached Tyler Durden,
Mm-hmm.
but
I
the
see.
line is literally like, "Who is this?" and he says Tyler. So it's like it's a great little bit of writing there to again tons of foreshadowing the movie of the twist, and that's the mark of a great twist for me. Is like on rewatch, it should be really obvious.
Absolutely, and it changes the your entire perception of the film, and that's what I think that is what marks a good twist. It is not just because I've seen a lot of movies that have like twists, But all that it is, like the reaction you have at the twist, you're kind of like, okay, a truly good twist not only makes you want to rewatch the film immediately, but I think it changes the film for the better. I think Fight Club, at first, it's like this. On your first watch, it almost is sort of like it's a strange movie. It's like it's kind of all over the place, and it's like doing a lot of stuff, and there's kind of a plot for the most part, but it's kind of meandering. But then upon the twist, and then after you finish the film, you rewatch it, and then it's an entirely different movie. I think for the better. I think it's a much, much better movie on the second watch. Another film of that sort is The Sixth Sense. Another film where it's funny because it's known for its twist of like, but it's a lot of people don't talk about how after you know the twist and you rewatch the film, it not only is the twist super obvious throughout the entire film, but also how it becomes a completely different movie. It's not really a thriller; it's more of a character study in a sense, a dramatic, a person coming to grips with their own death, basically.
And movies like this and Sixth Sense have kind of, again, like you said, led to this trope basically being like overused a lot of times, to the point where if we're watching like a horror or suspense movie with like a mysterious killer, we're always now to the point where like it's him, it's the main character, or it's the person who you'd least expect, just because the trope has been used so much that it's basically a cliche now.
Yeah, I think Scream did it the best back in '96. That was the twist for Scream. I won't spoil it, but it's such a simple tweak of the horror. It what's so brilliant about that film is it uses horror cliches against the audience. Like it uses them to sort of like divert the audience's attention and then to sort of trick them. It's a very good film. But yeah, so a film I had not watched in a long time. Rewatching it, everything about it still holds up. The filmmaking, the acting, Brad Pitt's unbelievable in it. He's just so excellent as Tyler. Edward Norton as the narrator. Helena Bonham Carter, also excellent. Everyone's good. Um, but yeah, the real reason I wanted to discuss it was just, in today's day and age, it is unbelievable how I almost think the film has gotten more relevant. But if like I don't know how that's possible, but like the film has gotten like more timely. If this film came out today, people would like criticize it for being like too on the nose about political current events. Like that's how unbelievably on the nose it is, I think.
Yeah, definitely the themes and subject matter it gets at are, you know, as like you said, more relevant than they've ever been, especially, the whole theme of like consumerism, masculinity, the sense of like our place in the world, our identity. Um, you know, I'll definitely say it is at times kind of like an edgy piece, very much of like the tone of the movie, like you said, it's dark and weird, of the late 90s, very much like that intro from the beginning where the blasting music playing is very much of its time. But setting all those aside, I think a lot of the messages it has about, the whole movie is a deeply anti-consumerist um, sentiment, right? Our main character is going through depression while seemingly not having any kind of real problems, right? He's got a job, he's got, a lot of stuff in his life, but he has no purpose. And I think that search for purpose and finding it through Fight Club and through, Project Mayhem, this kind of terrorist organization that he founds, um, is something that a lot of people struggle with, which is like, when there's no real conflict anymore in life, like what's the point? What are we doing? Like, we don't, even though we have stuff, we have nothing to worry about. We don't feel like we're doing anything with our lives.
Yeah, and that's why it's so timely, and that is, I think, the situation so many young men find themselves in. There's even it's so funny. There's even a line in the film that Tyler says, like, "We have no Great War, we have no Great Depression, we don't have this struggle that we have to overcome." And it's very interesting that um, it or who was it? I think I watched the YouTuber ContraPoints, and she put it really well. She was talking about how existential dread is almost like a privilege of the privileged. It's almost like if you're very disenfranchised, if you're very oppressed, you have a struggle that there's something tangible in your life that you can sort of like fight against or like face off against. But if that's taken away, if you're just living large, it is difficult to try and find some sort of direction. Like what am I supposed to do? Do I have a what adversity do I have to overcome? What battles do I have to fight? Um, what's interesting though is that because like what you said about the film being like kind of having like that edgy feel, like the very almost like at times like cringy anti-consumer, like very like Tyler Durden's like super like half of his speeches are like, oh my god, like they're almost like way too over the top. But on one hand, I'm wondering if the film truly is as anti-consumerist. It is in terms of the text, like obviously through like Edward Norton's view, and I do think it is anti-consumerist at the same time. But I almost wonder if the film is like it almost uses those things to as like a giant to almost like lull the audience in to Tyler's worldview. It's like, oh yeah, this consumerism, all this crap, yada yada yada, this is bullshit, yada yada yada, and they dress it up so much, and that's what makes Tyler's viewpoint so. It's like, oh, he's so edgy and so cool, and he's like got it all figured out. But then as the film goes on, not only does that, and that's the big irony of the film, not only does Project Mayhem become just as conformist as Tyler, criticizes the society for being, but and I noticed this too, and I think I pointed out to you when we talked about it. You kind of listen to what he's saying, and you kind of realize he doesn't really make any sense half the time, especially as the film goes on. And I think that was very purposeful in the sense of it really goes to show how that level someone who is charismatic and someone who is just able to sort of not really like point out a problem or say like not give you a solution to a problem, but just sort of like empathize with you, just point out like, hey, I understand your struggle, now listen to me. And once someone does that and has you wrapped around their finger, it's easy. It's like incredibly easy to get them to just like sort of like do to dance for you, to kind of manipulate them. And yeah, it almost every time it was so funny rewatching the movie where it seems like because I had that feeling too of like, oh, it's very edgy, like very over the top, and it's like the visuals and the filmmaking. But I almost wonder if that was part of the subversion in order to kind of like make Tyler and Project Mayhem and Fight Club seem like really cool. But then come the second half of the film, you're like, oh, wait a minute. No, this is actually kind of stupid and really dumb.
Well, I think that and this will maybe get into my criticisms of the movie. The beginning is really strong for me as a again like a weird you know edgy kind of mystery film about what's going on, and you don't quite know. It's like you're just kind of following along with the adventure. Towards the end of the film, I thought they kind of fumbled the ending. Now the ending is different than the book. I've not read the book, but I read the Wikipedia summary of it because I had a series where I kind of compared the books to the film versions. I did American Psycho and No Country for Old Men. And American Psycho has a lot of kind of similar uh, edgy, anti-consumerist, late '90s stuff about it. It's very similar to this movie, but
Well, I think, yeah, just to touch on that, American Psycho is very anti. It basically is saying like, hey, this lifestyle will turn you into a psychotic killer, or like, that sort of even like Patrick Bateman, who's a nut job, can't even handle this shit.
yeah,
Um,
and there's a lot of different ways to read that. It's a very nuanced book that I like a lot. But this one in particular, they changed the ending. Um, in the end, they're not. I don't think Project Mayhem is trying to blow, because in the movie they're trying to blow up like a credit card company headquarters so they can erase the national like debt or something like that. Kind of a more like happier, pleasant ending, and then he survives and Marla survives at the end. In the book, from what I'm reading, he was gonna blow up a building, like not for any kind of like noble goal or anything, but just again that kind of slightly edgy, like just lashing out at the world kind of thing. And it ends with the narrator in a mental institution, but the people who are like watching him in a mental institution are also his followers. So it's like
Hmm.
it's this very kind of bleak ending where it's like, oh, this monster that I've created is not going to stop, and it's just going to kind of perpetuate, all this kind of angst and anger moving forward. And I think the movie kind of dropped the ball on that, where they wanted this kind of happier ending where it's like, oh, Edward Norton and Marla are holding hands as the credit card blows up and everything's going to be fine. He even tells her, he's like, with the fucking gunshot out of his cheek, he's like, everything's going to be fine now, Marla. It's all resolved now that I've killed, Tyler Durden by shooting myself.
Well, that
So I felt like the ending was kind of weak in that regard.
that is funny that you point that out, because every time I watch that movie, it upsets me because there's one line. Um, there's one line that's put in there, and I don't really know. Maybe it was supposed to show that like Tyler was nuts. Maybe it was supposed to try and like hand wave it. But there's one line where Edward Norton, the narrator, goes to Tyler and he's like, "Hey, we're gonna blow up these buildings and kill people? That's not what Project Mayhem is about." And Tyler Durden's like, "Well, no, no, all the people in the buildings are our people," and it's like that's not how that works. Like, if you like blow up several high-rise buildings in a given area, there's other like people are going to be killed. Like that's just not, or you're at least at the very least like kind of risking it. And I don't know if the film was, in its defense, I don't know if the film was like like maybe there was a part of when Tyler said that, like it was supposed to point out like his stupidity, like his almost like, nah, man, it's all taken care of. Like it's supposed to kind of characterize him as like crazy. But yeah, at the ending, it's an incredible visual of the buildings blowing up, but at the same time, it's like the Pixies are playing. And it's kind of like a happy ending, and it's like I think a lot of people just fucking died from.
Well, I think the studio probably forced like a happier ending than the novel did. I've seen interviews with Chuck Palahniuk, however you pronounce his last name, where he said that they wanted the original line. I think Marla's supposed to say when she has sex with Tyler Durden for the first time is like, um, I hope I get pregnant so that I can abort your baby.
Oh, I
And it's
want
like
to
this
have your
really,
abortion. Yeah.
yeah. I was on Joe Rogan, and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, that line's way too edgy." So they changed it to, I haven't been fucked like that since grade school,"
I
which
feel
I
like that's
guess
I feel like that's way edgier. I feel like that's way edgier than I want to have your abortion. I mean, maybe back in '99, maybe I
the
guess.
other one, I don't know, is just kind of weird. But from that interview, I can tell that there was studio pressure to kind of tone it down a little bit, not go full, American Psycho with American Psycho also toned down a lot of the shit from the book as well. So
Hmm.
I think it's just the times that they were living in, and so I think the ending message gets kind of muddled in there. But I think you're right. I think the whole point of why Edward Norton, the narrator, is so against Project Mayhem at the end is because it Project Mayhem was not necessarily about their anti-consumerist ideals that I think the author is in favor of those kind of arguments. But again, I think Project Mayhem turned into something where it was just kind of angst and again lashing out at the world and just wanton destruction that the normal side of our narrator's brain was like, no, this is way too far, especially after like Robert Paulson dies. The Tyler Durden part of him is basically like his dark ego that just like doesn't give a shit about anything, just wants to destroy. There's that great bit where he's beating up that pretty blonde guy and like ruins his face, and he's like, I just wanted to destroy something pretty. And that was, I think, the Tyler Durden side of his personality just kind of coming out in that instance.
Absolutely, and it's just so funny how it's just amazing how even today it's. I think we mentioned this on like a previous like thing. It it's like, ladies, if you're ever dating a guy, ask him like what the message of Fight Club is, and depending on his answer, we'll know like whether you like should date him. Because if he like says like, yeah, man, Tyler had it figured out, and it's like, oh my god, you missed like. So like the entire point of the film is that it's like, oh yeah, I'm not a conformist consumer. I'm gonna follow this guy and do whatever he says and dress exactly the same and don't ask any questions and do whatever he tells me to. And it's like, and it's funny because when you're watching the film, it's pretty on the nose. Like it gets to the point where they're all chanting the same thing, they're all wearing the same thing, and yet even today, I feel like I run into people and I still see people like unironically like idolizing
Well,
like
there was
Tyler
a part
Durden
of
or
his philosophy, like we talked about and we agreed with. Like again, his whole speech about we have no Great War, we have no Great Depression, our depression's like a spiritual one. That I mean, that is true. I think again, his methods and the way he went about it was wrong. But again, I think there are the film gets at some truths that our modern society, like we have problems with. We have deep kind of spiritual and mental problems with our society. Funny enough, The Sopranos did the same thing, and came out at the same time in 1999,
Mhm.
the first episode. When she says like, I think when Tony says like I'm depressed, and she says, Melfi says, I think a lot of Americans feel the same way you do. Like a lot of people felt this way. The 90s were kind of like a boom time of like the .com bubble and all this kind of stuff, and people just felt like, oh, there's nothing to do in life. We have all this stuff, but we're still unhappy. And so I think the film gets at a lot of those truths, but again, the way they respond to it is not the right thing.
Well, it's the film is both setting up the truth of, and this is kind of like how like this is the whole thing. Whether even today, this is like what's so frustrating about like people who fall, whether it's like cult leaders or cult of personalities today. The Jordan Petersons, the Andrew Tates. They always say it's like, oh well, he's touching on this truth, and it's like okay, like that's true. You get the truth, but then the question is, okay, what do you fill that void with? And in the case of Fight Club, basically what the film is saying is like, yes, there is this void, and because there is this void, it makes it so easy. Like that's what's so ironic about the film is that you have all these guys that are rebelling against like this like consumerism, this conformity, and then they are so easily bought into. They so easily buy into Tyler Durden, and at some point they just kind of they don't even know what they're doing anymore. They're just doing whatever he tells them. They're asking questions, and I think the film serves as a sort of, if not a satire, but almost like a what's sort of like for a cautionary tale of, hey, if you have a society like this and that is people don't have that sort of struggle or adversity in their lives, they will seek, especially young men, they will seek it out, and that makes them very susceptible to be manipulated by such a charismatic person like Tyler Durden. um yeah, it's insane how relevant it is to today.
Well, I think also, I mean, one of the biggest themes of the movie is also identity and like what defines us as people. The narrator is struggling with that at the beginning. Tyler Durden like points out that like your stuff like owns you. You don't own your stuff, because at the beginning he's all about like just the stuff he's buying for his apartment. That's how he defined himself. That's how he defined himself as like complete. Um, and again, the whole battle between the narrator and Tyler Durden is about his internal struggle of like, what is my identity? Tyler Durden was his kind of idealized version of himself, which allowed him to do all these bad things that the narrator eventually realizes is bad. And I think that's an internal struggle that a lot of us go through as well. It's like we all have the urges that like Tyler Durden was satisfying. The urge to fight, the urge to destroy things, the urge to just kind of assert yourself in life. Um, but when taken too far, that's when things go awry. And I think that's usually my philosophy on all these things. Like I said, I think there's a lot of stuff about you know Tyler Durden's philosophy that I agree with, and I think fight. I don't know if I'd want to do Fight Club itself, but like that's why a lot of people get a lot of joy and satisfaction out of like exercise or training martial arts or all this kind of other stuff, because it's like, okay, it's satisfying this itch in in my caveman brain that, like, I should be struggling, I should be trying to conquer something like that. But again, any philosophy, I think, when taken to its extreme, is just not going to work out.
Well, it's so funny you mentioned that too about the identity, because there was one line, and it's funny because I actually heard someone critiquing this, um, and they were critiquing this as a part of the movie as like a flaw, and I actually think it was a very purposeful decision. There's one of the there's one scene where they get on the bus, and Edward Norton's talking about, it's like, yeah, me and Tyler size everything, like he thinks he's hot shit. Like, me and Tyler size everything up, and we're like we're too good for society. And at one point, he looks at a Calvin Klein ad, and it's like, is that what a real man looks like? And they're like, and what does he say? Self improvement is masturbation. Um, and someone pointed out, I think this is actually way back. Remember when IMDb had message boards? Oh, okay. So yeah, they used to have message boards, and I think someone typed this where they were like, "Isn't it ironic or kind of hypocritical that Edward Norton's like, is that what a real man looks like?" But then it's revealed at the end of the film that Tyler is his idealized version of himself, and like the main thing that came out of that movie was that Brad Pitt has like a god's body, and someone pointed out that, like, oh, isn't that hypocritical? And it's like, I think that was actually very purposeful. I think that was sort of like the big irony, is that you have Edward Norton character saying, it's like, I am not consumerist, I am not a sheep, and yet his idealized version of himself is like pretty boy Brad Pitt with like a ripped six pack and like bulging shoulders. It's almost, and then of course there is the whole sort of like homoerotic underpinning of the film, and how, like, the fight clubs are sort of, reminiscent of, like, guys on the down low. um it just, it's every time I just rewatching it, I almost get, like, kind of like how you were saying before, it's like I almost felt like the film was like, oh, it's trying to be edgy, but the more and more I watch it, I almost wonder if it's like doing it subversively, if it knows exactly what it's doing, if it's almost like using the edginess to try, or like the coolness of the film, it's trying to kind of like suck guy, especially like younger men, it's trying to like suck you in and make Tyler Durden seem so cool and like charismatic. And then the entire second half of the film is sort of like blowing that, and like it almost like makes you, it almost sort of like makes you realize how easy you, the viewer, could be to manipulate, how easy it could be for someone like Tyler Durden to manipulate you, the viewer, by just saying a bunch of like, smart sounding philosophy.
Yeah. I thought of that too during that scene. I was like, even Edward Norton, not just Brad Pitt, but Edward Norton had a great body too, and that very, toned, very cut. And it's like, I do wonder how much of that it was intentional versus how much of that is just like, when you cast actors in a movie, they're gonna be really good looking guys. That's just how the movie industry works. They're not gonna cast someone. Nowadays, they might do that more. They might cast someone unattractive, to be subversive, but definitely in the 90s, like, everyone was looking sexy, if you're, an A-list actor like that.
I think I think Edward Norton was like the perfect. He was like, he's not like bad looking, but like he wasn't like pretty boy. If they cast like Leonardo DiCaprio as a narrator, the movie would just, okay, shut the fuck up. No, this isn't
Yeah,
what we're
I mean,
doing.
it's definitely like, again, I mean, when he's a fantastic actor, just regardless, like, just his range and like what he did during the movie of like coming across like he didn't, know what was going on. um he's one of my favorite actors of all time. I think he's just fantastic. But like I said, it also doesn't necessarily matter whether that was their intention or not. It's like, whatever your interpretation of the film is, if that adds to your kind of understanding of the movie and your understanding of its themes, then that's true to you. That's your interpretation. And I think that a lot of things we tend to prescribe to, like, the creators, like, oh, they must have meant this, they must have meant that, is not necessarily true. Sometimes it's just an accident, sometimes they meant something completely different. But if we, the viewer, can take a lesson from that, and derive some kind of meaning from that, that I think it's, again, it's true for our reality.
And it's funny too, just how relevant it is. So we've talked about it before. I have experience in like the bodybuilding sphere, and what I see a lot in like a lot of these communities, like they're very, and I don't mean to like if people out there, if you're a lifter, a bodybuilder, I don't mean to say this about you particularly, or like all communities. I will say though, a lot of bodybuilding or lifting communities can get very culty. They can get very sort of like weird. They can get, especially when they're like with like younger dudes, it can get kind of weird. And one thing I always found very ironic about the whole bodybuilding sphere, particularly bodybuilding, is that a lot of guys, these same guys, they will attack modernity. They'll attack like TikTok stars and like people who are just online for attention and all that shit, or like TikTok girl twerking and yeah. And yet, simultaneously, these are the same guys who are taking like 5,000 selfies of themselves in the mirror and trying to get the perfect light and showing off. Oh, my delts aren't like perfect. It kind of instills this. They are, and again, this isn't like for everyone, of course, but in a way, they are displaying or projecting the same sort of like self-centeredness and vanity that they are criticizing society, but they're like completely oblivious to it. It's like they have blinders on. It's amazing.
Well, I think a lot of aspects in our lives are very, culty. Like it's like I work in tech, and it's very much like that in the sense that they don't just want, like, you to work for them. They want you to believe in their message that they're helping the world. They want your whole, like, again, they want your identity to be your job. Like they want your, like, if you work at Google, you're a Google worker. Like that's who you are. This is your personality, so that you'll invest all your time and energy into doing your job and all this kind of stuff. And I think a lot of people are susceptible to that. I notice a lot of people who work in these industries very much take pride, again, and define themselves by their job, um, which I don't necessarily hate. Like, I mean, that's your personal choice. Like, in some ways, I kind of do that as well by like YouTube. I kind of almost define myself by, making content, and I get excited about it, and it's all this kind of stuff. And I think it's because the great struggle that we all go through in life that this movie also exemplifies, again, is like, what is the purpose of my life? What am I doing all this for? For some people, it might be their family. It's like, I'm doing this for my kids or whatever. For other people, it might be for like a dream or an aspiration or a goal they have. It could be their job. It could be anything. But again, we're all looking for something to define ourselves by, and it can change over time. It's definitely changed for me over time. But I think, again, that's why this movie is so good, because it gets at the crux of that. Tyler Durden, it was the narrator's attempt to define himself and to create an identity for himself, and it went badly, and he decided he didn't want to go that route anymore. But I think that struggle, again, is something that all of us go through, and not just men either. I don't think it's Fight Club is just necessarily about men's trying to reclaim their masculinity. I think women, I think people of all types struggle for identity in this world. And more, we're increasingly asking ourselves the tough questions of, like, what is this all for?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, it definitely can be universal, but I think it is very specific towards men in the sense of the sort of idea for women. Like, obviously, a lot of women nowadays, like, obviously, they have to like search for purpose and identity and whatnot. But I think the difference there, and I think this is sort of what Fight Club touches upon, is that women are given the freedom, and this isn't I don't mean this is like a bad thing. It's women are sort of given the freedom to step into both traditionally feminine and traditionally masculine roles. So it's like, hey, if you want to be a mother, stay at home mom, if you want to do, traditionally feminine stuff, or if you want to, be a businesswoman, be a girl boss, do whatever. It, obviously, like, women still have to find that path for themselves, and they are restricted in many ways. But when it comes to sort of what avenues they can take to get there, outside of like institutional barriers, of course, they are given a lot more freedom. But then you have men where it is, you have men where the world is changing, especially like after, like, the feminist movement and, the sexual revolution and whatnot. All these things that defined, like, hey, what makes a man? What makes you a man? All of a sudden, all these things that you used to do, it's like, oh, well, it was, being a soldier, fighting in war, or, taking care of your family, or whatever. All these things are being just sort of stripped away, in a sense. Like, they're just, most households nowadays, you cannot survive on a single income, so both parents have to work. So I think for a lot of more like traditionally minded men, they sort of feel, I think there's even been studies about this where men, if they, I think there was actually one where it was something like, if a man, if a wife begins making, I think, 40% of the salary. Oh, sorry, it's as soon as the wife crosses 40% of the, like, total income of the household threshold, stress levels of men went up, because it almost is sort of like this threatening of, oh, am I not the provider, quote unquote. Yeah, there's no great, I mean, like, you can join the army, but, like, it's, there's a reason that, because, and I see this too a lot of days with, like, a lot of, like, these, like, sigma male uh movements and shit. They'll, like, weirdly fetishize war and, like, the brotherhood, like, oh, the men who stormed Normandy. It's very and that's so, like, perfect. They always go to World War II. They never really talk about Vietnam or the Gulf War, because with World War II, that was something where it's like, oh, okay, I'm storming Normandy. We're actually, like, we have a very clear purpose here. We're doing a very good thing. I mean, obviously bad things happened during the war, but, like, overall the mission was a good. But then you switch over to, like, Vietnam, or, like, the Gulf War, or even the war in Afghanistan, Iraq War, and it's just kind of, and that's what, sort of like, it kind of connects to, like, the disillusionment of the Vietnam War, where people just, they just kind of like, what am I doing? Like, what are we fighting for? What is the mission? What is my purpose? Even I may have joined the military to find a purpose, but now I'm here, and you're telling me that there is one, but I look with my own two eyes and I don't really see a purpose. It just seems, yeah.
I do. Again, we've been talking about this a lot. I think the struggle for identity and what it does all mean, and like I don't necessarily think that, again, the answer is necessarily like go out and fighting and going to war. I don't think that makes a lot of people happy. And it's interesting they brought up Hemingway in this. The narrator is asking which historical person would you want to like fight, and he says Hemingway, and that kind of reminded me about Hemingway's experiences with war, and not like his experience was that war was almost like an emasculating thing. His great novel, of course, The Sun Also Rises, was about a soldier who became impotent due to injuries in the war. So Hemingway was someone who saw the horrors of war. He didn't fight directly; he was an ambulance driver, but he saw that, like, oh, this wasn't just like an old kind of like yeehaw kind of thing. We're all gonna like go fight and get drunk, and we're all gonna be men together. It was like, oh, this can be a very traumatizing and emasculating like experience. Of course, I mean, a lot of people get wounded, hurt, injured, killed during war. So, again, I think I don't like that idea that it's like you you have to go down this fight road to have any kind of purpose in your life. And I don't think the movie is suggesting that. I think there are some things that men do kind of yearn for, of like conflict and struggle and achieving goals. But that can be achieved in a lot of different ways, and you don't necessarily have to like beat each other to a pulp and lose teeth in some basement of a dive bar somewhere.
And I think that, to be like, I think that is, you're correct. I think that's what the film is saying. It's like these guys are so desperate for a purpose or for a struggle that they're fucking idiots kicking the shit out of each other in, like, a dingy bar, thinking that they're, like, rebelling against the world. And it's like, what? It's very funny you mentioned that about Hemingway. because he is always sort of, when you sort of look at, um, when people talk about him, or you kind of like consider the image people have of him, um, they always sort of almost like romanticize him as like this like very like man's man, like, brawler, whatever. And he was that, absolutely. But if you actually like look at his writing, um like you were saying about his experiences, though, it's very sentimental. It's very even existential in a way. The old man, the sea. Look at like read that shit. It's his work is very it has masculine themes, but it is very subversive of them. It's very sort of what's what I'm looking for. It's very sort of aware of the other side of the coin, if you will.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's interesting about Hemingway because, and again, I don't like to do a lot of reading into these people's personal lives because you don't know like what his personal life was like, the things he thought about. But I did find it interesting that he was someone who like from stories I've seen about him, and I might be wrong about this. I'm not 100% sure, but like his mother like wanted him to be a girl and like used to dress him up like a girl, and you could maybe read like that his kind of hyper masculinity later in life was kind of a reaction to that, and like really wanted to like prove himself and like distance himself from that. Again, I don't know if that was going through his head or not. No one knows what was actually inside of his mind. um but it is interesting to think that like again a lot of times this kind of hyper masculine obsession comes from like a feeling of inferiority or a feeling of like, oh, I'm not masculine enough. But I
compensation,
think
yeah.
that, but to me, like one of the defining things about my own version of masculinity, like what my idealized version of it is like just being comfortable with yourself. Like you don't need to prove yourself to other people. Now again, I don't want to say that women can't do that either. Women can totally have that mindset. It's not just men, but I feel like if you want to be a man, you should try to basically just be comfortable with yourself, do live life on your own terms, and not define yourself by other people's expectations of you. That, in my mind, is more weak than it is strong.
Well, that's sort of the whole irony of, and I think that's also something that Fight Club really explores. There is this irony of this catch-22 that a lot of men find themselves in, where they want to feel like men, they want to feel manly, they want to be perceived as men, but in order to do so, they have to get validation. They have to have external validation from others. Like, for example, one of the funniest, a very similar catch-22 is, I've experienced like the pickup artist red pill spheres, and it's hilarious where you have all like these alpha sigma males, and all they're talking about is like, yeah, man, bitches ain't shit, don't talk, like, if you know women don't mean anything, focus on success, don't worry about women, don't chase women. And yet, what is 95% of their content based around? What do they spend 95% of their time talking about? To women. It's like how to fuck women, how to get women to like you, how to get women to, see you as a man. And it's like this hellish existence where you like, you're saying one thing. It's like, I don't care what anyone thinks. Or, that's a perfect example. If anytime someone says I don't care what anyone thinks, for a fact that person 9 times out of 10 is 100% cares what people think, because they want people to think that way about them. And it's like this horrendous catch-22. And I do feel for a lot of guys in that position, because they're almost like, again, like back, and this is sort of like why they romanticize certain, like, forms of traditional masculinity, whether it's war or, fighting or all this stuff, because they see them as, oh, these are malls of masculinity where if I partake in them, whether it's like lifting or like martial arts or, war or whatever, it's now I can feel like a man while I'm engaging in them, because people are like, people around will like perceive me as such. But if they see if I'm knitting or like, doing some like girly shit, then like, oh, they'll think I'm girly. Where I'm with you, I'm like, well, no, if you like knitting, I feel like the manliest thing you can do is like, fuck you, I like knitting. Like, fuck off, bro.
And again, I think we all kind of search for like validation from other people because again, like I said before, we're all trying to define ourselves. It's definitely an issue that everyone I think goes through, and it's like I don't think anyone has the answer. I certainly don't. I don't know how you should live your life or how you should define yourself. I don't even know how I should define myself. I think the ways that I do it a lot of times are not the correct way. I've become like obsessed with something like one part of my life to the point where I've ignored other parts of it, and it's not been healthy for me. And I think years from now, I'll look back on my life and be like, oh yeah, you were completely oblivious to kind of how you were defining yourself again, like how you were living your life. You were making all these mistakes, and I think that is the great struggle that the movie talks about that we're going through. It's like it's an internal one that my only advice, like I said before, is to just try to be comfortable with yourself because that's all you get, man. The other people like it feel like the external validation, like it feels really good in the moment, and I still search for it. Like, right? I mean, when a video does well, I'm like, oh my god, it's
Oh
so
yeah,
incredible.
we're human. It's a part of our existence. I a good well two good lessons, I guess. Well, not really a lesson, but I think the idea of, and this is I think why a lot of like people who are very traditionally minded don't like the idea of like postmodernism, is they sort of feel as though they want to cling on to certain traditions or cultural, landmarks as a way to sort of to sort of like solidify their own identity, to sort of give them a sense of who they are. Whereas, nowadays, well, this is like what's so ironic. If we take people like Hemingway or like a lot of like very great men, men who like you would want to look up to or like see as like beacons of masculinity. These were all people who were very like self-reflective on their, I don't want to say existential, but they were very flexible in terms of their identity. And I think one of the big issues that a lot of men face is that in this time, in this sort of, you know, modern world, if you will, modernity, they feel as though it's like, well, there's no structures around that I can attach myself to solidify my identity, and it makes them scared. It kind of gives them anxiety, like, oh, I don't know who I am. I have to find something to find out who I am. Whereas, and again, I feel this way with a lot of like great men that I've read, especially like poets, writers, great thinkers. These were men who, like, when they were faced with that sort of like anxiety of like, I don't know who I am, or what kind of man I am, they almost embraced it. They didn't run away from it, and they didn't like try to find, oh, I have to run and like find a sense of identity. They almost embraced it in a way of like, I don't know who I am. Let's go out there and explore. Let's travel. Let's try new things, and then I can find out who I am. And unfortunately, and I think that is actually what the ending of Fight Club symbolizes. It, sort of like the big irony of it is like, you have Tyler Durden saying, it's like, you're not a sheep. Come and follow me and do exactly as I say, and listen to, don't ask questions and do whatever I say, and don't ask, And yet at the end, Edward Norton's character is, what it's supposed to signify is that he is, I don't think he has any more of a sense of his identity at the end of the film. Because like nothing has really changed in terms of his. I mean, like, I guess he like left his job, but he's kind of like SOL at the end of the film. Like, he doesn't have a job. He's still Project Mayhem, and that's sort of why I'm not the. Yeah, I kind of like the novel's ending better because it is a bleak ending, but like purposely so. It's supposed to like point out the irony of his situation. But on the other hand, I do like the film ending because it signifies, and like that was the whole theme of blowing up the credit card companies, is that if you destroy the debt, everyone goes back to zero. You can start anew. And I think that is what the ending of Fight Club is supposed to signify with the narrator, is that he is he has shed the influences of like his former conformist life. He has shed the influence of the Tyler persona and Project Mayhem. And now he's at zero. And now he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know where he's going. But now he's like, like I think the final line of the film is, or not the final line, but one of the final lines is like, trust me, everything's going to be fine. And it's like the most confident we've ever heard from him. And yet he's like, everything's awful. Like nothing is like going right in his life. There's like shit's everywhere. He's lost his job. But he finally feels like, okay, now I'm in a place where I'm almost comfortable in my confusion. I don't know who I am. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm comfortable. I embrace that, and now I'm going to go out and find myself. So again, like, yeah, the novel ending I think is more fitting to like the more bleak satirical atmosphere of the film, or I mean, most of the novel. But I do admire the film for that because I do think it is a very, it's a very poignant note to end on.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that was again the ultimate message of the film was that struggle of identity and coming to terms with it. Maybe not having an answer, but just being willing to embrace it and not have to kind of retreat into fantasies, which is what Tyler Durden was. Essentially, didn't like. I mean, he was just a fantasy of the main character who took over at times, and but it was a really good film. I will say that. Like, I criticisms aside, I thought the cinematography was great. I love the film effects. It shows a dick at the very end, which I thought was very funny because they spliced it in there. I love that shutter effect when Tyler's giving his speech. That was really cool. The movie was just really good of its time of the late '90s, but definitely one of the better like surprise films. That twist ending is, like you said, legendary. I don't think there's going to be a twist like that again in our lifetimes.
Well, I think part of that reason is just because we kind of mentioned it earlier, but just because everyone's always expecting them. That twist in particular, like the split personality, and like to be fair, the film I think does kind of cheat. Um, Spoilers for Mr. Robot. Um, it's hard to say that because it's like it kind of implies, but whatever. Well, I guess it's only the first season, but Mr. Robot is very heavily inspired from Fight Club, and something I really admired about Mr. Robot is that the show never cheats. So it's at the end of the first season, you find out the two characters are actually the same person, and if you rewatch the first season, you can actually tell that the scenes are like the other characters only interact with one of them at a time. Like it's very, very carefully done so it doesn't break any rules. The one thing I do irks me about Fight Club is that they do kind of cheat. Is like that there's times when like Tyler and the narrator are in like the same, they're like Edward Norton and Brad Pitt, they're in the same scene and no one like interacts with them, but it kind of like they try to explain it away later. It's like sometimes you imagine yourself watching me, and it's like I don't know. I think it kind of felt a little bit cheap.
Yeah, I mean that's the cinema technique of it. It's I think American Psycho had the same thing, which is again one of the spoilers, I guess, for that movie. There's this big underlying thing of like, was anything in the film real? And the novel is much better about that because you're just reading about it and you're like, oh, I'm almost certain some of these things didn't happen, like that end sequence when he's running through the streets. But because it's a film and you're actually seeing it for yourself, you're like, oh, this must be real because I'm watching it. And then if it's not real, then it's like, then what was I watching?
That's a
You
good point.
actually filmed this and put it together. So I think that's again one of the downsides of film is you don't have that same level of ambiguity. But the film does add a lot of cool things of its own to it that I really enjoyed. Again, that those film effects were awesome. There was this kind of meta, I don't know if you call it humor about the film, of the fact that you're watching a film that also dealt with like film stuff too, that I was like, okay, that's cool. And overall I enjoyed this movie club review of it. Like I'm looking forward to doing more of these in the future, of again interesting films that could spark an hour long discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're next up. I'll probably, if you want to choose the next movie, since I chose Fight Club. But yeah,
I'll think about it.
it's just so funny how nowadays with like people like whether it's like Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate, you have a lot of young men who are in that exact same. Nothing has changed over the last like 20 something years. A lot
Nothing
of
ever
young men,
changes.
yeah, a lot of young men are still like they're so desperate for some sort of path in their lives, but instead of, and that's sort of like I think the big irony of the film, and that's sort of, and I don't want to like say this is like I think you kind of pointed out where it's like, or you kind of implied it earlier, where it's like I think one of the biggest tenets of masculinity, at least in my view, is being able to go your own way. And I don't mean that to say that like you have to be like purposely contrarian, because those sort of people, well, that's the whole irony of Fight Club, is you had all these
Yeah,
guys who thought they were being contrarian. Or there's actually a great South Park joke where Stan goes to the goth
the
kids and he's like,
God
how
kids.
do,
Yeah, I remember that
how do
episode.
I how do I become a nonconformist? You just have to dress like we
To
do
do
and just
everything
listen to
we
the
do.
same
Yeah.
music. Um, but I mean, like, I think one of the largest tenets of masculinity is doing what you think is right or doing what you want without worrying what others think or what others say. Obviously, like in degree, like you should still, like, if there are people who like you respect who are giving you advice, you should take that into account. But picking your own path and following it. And if you don't have a path or don't know where your path is, being okay with like, it's like, okay, yeah, I don't know who I am. I'm figuring that out. And yet we have so many young men who, instead of doing that, especially nowadays, they're just latching on to the first guy they can get, whether it's again like Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, whoever. They just latch on to them. It's like, hey, this guy's
Yeah.
going to tell me exactly what I need to do. And again, I don't think I can't consider anything less masculine. And like, it's hard because I don't want to like be critical of it, but it's like I can't think of anything less masculine as like I'm going to let this other person tell me exactly what to do. And everything they say, I'm going to follow, and to
No.
gotta be
The,
on my
the
life.
only person that they should be latching on to is you and me. They should be doing everything that you and I tell them to do, and that is how you become a man. That
Well,
was the whole
even
point of Fight Club, and that's the whole point of this podcast. So,
oh,
yeah.
sorry, I was just gonna say like even that, like, I think we've even talked about it. I don't know if like there are some YouTubers who are like that, where they're like, if their
Oh,
fans are
definitely
like
there are.
very, if their fans are very like fanboy, like yes, like a great
Oh,
one.
definitely there are.
I feel weird when people do that. I think we had I
Yeah.
think there was a person in our Discord chat who like did that. They were like, "Hey man, like I really like love your work and like I appreciate it, but like he did it a little bit too much." And I was kind of like, "Okay, now I'm feeling a little uncomfortable."
Well, I encourage that. The Cult of Kino coming soon. But
You can do it,
thank you
Kino.
guys all for watching this. We've reached our hour here. Let us know what you thought of this. Let us know your thoughts about Fight Club, and also if you have recommendations for future movie club movies, let us know in the comments. We'll definitely take suggestions. We want to watch alongside you guys and have a big discussion about it. So be sure to share those in the comments. And thank you as always, Mac, for another very interesting discussion this week.
Thank you, sir. Glad to get to revisit Fight Club. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's awesome. And stay tuned for the next episode of No One's a Critic coming soon.
Take care, y'all.